Welcome to the Crit House. I'm Jeff Larson. Today on the Crit House, Ariella Wolens is a curator at the NSU Museum of Art in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. There, she is helping to shape some of today's most compelling photographic exhibitions. She recently curated a major show with legendary photographer Joel Meyerowitz, and she is currently organizing an upcoming exhibition marking the 25th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, featuring Myerwitz's powerful images from Ground Zero in New York City. In this episode of the Crit House, myFIVE series, Ariella shares 5 photographs that have influenced her curatorial visions, including images from John Dvola, Tina Barney, an image of Frederick Douglas, Guy Bourdin, and Joel Meyerowitz. Well, Ariella, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. So one of the things that we commonly do is we talk to photographers, and sometimes we've talked to curators, but they have generally been photo curators or people who are very specific to the photography world. You are new for us because you have a broader approach where you're dealing with modern art more broadly. So tell us about yourself and where you are in the art world.
So I am a curator at NSU Art Museum, Fort Lauderdale. We have an exhibition at the moment of the artist Joel Meyerowitz, sort of the pioneer of color photography.
The great Joel Meyerowitz, yeah.
Yes, and we received a donation, the museum in 2021 of 1,700 photographs from Joel's archive. Joel recently sold his archive as a color photographer who, has made prints since 62, I think it was hundreds of thousands.
Wow.
And so we have, not just his fine prints, but also his notes with when he did work with labs. So it's really sort of a incredible view into the work of a photographer working with like an object-based practice. He spoke a lot to me about the importance of time, about the sort of the moment of chance, and also the photographer's awareness of sort of the peak moment of grace or gesture within a moment that they're observing, and seeing when that sort of the scene comes together as an image, and not necessarily an image that's like perfectly composed, but
yes,
sort of that intention or that moment when somebody reveals themselves. That was the through line that I emphasized with his work. We also received a number of his works from the early 60s, before he could really afford to photograph in color full time. So we have a large representation of his black and white images from his European trip that he did in 67 from London to Morocco, so European African trip.
And you have another show of his work planned coming up,
Yes.
of his work from 9/11 and
Exactly.
Ground Zero, right?
So yes, weirdly, it is going to be come next year, 25 years since 9/11, and we'll be honoring it with a presentation of works from his Aftermath series. It was a presentation which Joel's archive for the documentation of what was the crime scene after 9/11. He was the only photographer provided or granted full access during the cleanup for about 8 months after 9/11. It became part of the official State Department's archive, and it toured like 90 countries and US embassies, and was presented at the Venice Architecture Biennale alongside steel beams from the site. And so there's sort of this cohesive representation of the project that we'll be showing.
Well, certainly an historic body of work, and it is shocking that 25 years is coming up to that event.
It really is.
So, Ariella, tell us, you've chosen these 5 images, and you stuck with photography as opposed to your broader focus on other works. Tell us about what you went through in deciding what those 5 images would be, and how you came up with the 5.
To me, it wasn't necessarily the photos that had, the biggest lasting sort of impact on me. It was more something that like left an indelible mark. It's not a representation of what I think are the greatest photographs of all time. It's
Sure.
more to me what I feel were the most impactful photographs to me in, my experiences.
Well, it's a very different conversation between the greatest works of art versus the ones that were most important to you and
Right.
had meaning to you. So let's take a look at your images. We start with John Dvola and this just amazing image. Tell us about this and why this is has meaning to you.
So I picked this work because John was the first artist that I ever interviewed, and it was for a friend had started like a magazine. I was like 22 and like very overeager and just like he was just throwing things at me of like who were his dream people that he would want to be included in the magazine. And John Dvola wasn't somebody that I was familiar with at all. My friend is his name's Theo Sion. He's a great fashion photographer, and he taught me a lot about photography and brought me to sort of be confronted with Dvola's work. And it was really in looking at Myerwitz's work over the past few years, sort of, I felt like a sort of full circle. Often they're both artists that, very different in what they produce, but their approaches to photography and their sort of as teachers in a way, even though Joel never really taught. He taught at Cooper in the 60s for a moment, and John Dvola is sort of a lifelong sort of photography teacher. I believe he's at UC Riverside. The way they think about photography, I find a lot of sort of affinities. They're both artists that work in series, which I appreciate with all artists, this idea of sort of having a problem and sort of having that be the challenge that you set yourself and sort of exploring it in a committed sort of portion in time. I think that with this is Dvola's what he's this series he's best known for. It's called the Zuma series, and it was an abandoned house that he found on Zuma Beach, and he used to go in there and have these sort of experiments that he would do where he was sort of there's elements in painting in it where he's like doing these like wall markings and he's throwing things in the air and he's not really sure how they're going to look. And it's also this idea of like what the idea of photography as being sort of a window or all pictures as being a window, because it is in some ways like a landscape image of like a very simple natural portrait of a horizon line, but then there's so much in it to be unpacked. I love the color, the like destruction, the absence of people, but it's like there's such a narrative aspect to it at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
It's a really rich image.
Is that in the center upper third? Is that being thrown out? Is that like a piece of paper? Because
No,
it looks
he,
like,
he he was throwing things in the air and just documenting, like, not knowing sort of if he was going to get them in midair or on the ground. It might be a magazine. It was often like books and magazines.
yeah, that's amazing. It looks like a bird, and I've seen some of his
Exactly.
work, and I don't think I've noticed the things being thrown into it. I thought that's pretty amazing. So your second photographer we're going to speak of is Tina Barney, who's not just a photographer, but tell us about this image and how this
I
came to you.
she Tina was also an artist I interviewed for this magazine, Hot and Cool. For me, she's almost like a literary photographer. Like there is so much history being told within her images. Obviously, because especially with this series, she was photographing her family a lot, early on in her work. And so you have all of the sort of dynamics of, intimacy being shown in these like interior spaces and just like how stylized and like just so American, but also this sort of waspy. It's just like this an incredible sort of view into a world that like I have no notion of, and I think a lot of people don't. And it's like also capturing something in time which maybe doesn't exist anymore. And she's also someone who has like a great fluency in composition and understanding of, how like to make a picture that has like great harmony. I love the way that she prints on like, this 4x5 scale. Well, Joel in his portraits and Tina as well is using a 4x5 viewfinder camera.
Now, this is from a photographer who's not known, but talk about the image. I think I heard this is the most photographed person in history, or it was at one
Most
point.
photographed person of the 19th century.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
I worked on an exhibition at the SCAD Museum of Art in Savannah, Georgia, which was called Frederick Douglas, Emperors of Freedom. And it was a incredible collector of African American art and ephemera. His name's Walter Evans, and he had amassed an archive of material belonging to Frederick Douglass and his family. And so we presented that in sort of conversation with work by contemporary artists responding to the legacy of Douglas. And I grew up in the UK. They don't teach you about slavery. They don't teach you about, the history of abolition in the US at all, anything like that. I had very little framework for understanding who this person was. Working on this exhibition, I found that photography was sort of the through line of what connected Frederick Douglass's work in terms, or like his legacy in terms of art, really. He wrote 4 essays on photography. He understood it in the way that we sort of understand it now, as in a societal way, the way that it is able to be like a tool of self-determination. His foresight, and it was just a completely different approach to the way of thinking about photography as a curator, as being a social tool rather than purely a way to think about representation in terms of like pure image.
Sure. I mean, certainly a man who understood the power of image well before most, or of the photograph well before most of us did.
And reproduction before,
Yes.
I think even like Walter Benjamin put it into words, like this idea of circulation. After Douglas, I think the most photographed person was Abraham Lincoln. When in reading about Douglas, it was argued that part of the way that Lincoln engineered a successful campaign and was elected was in using photography, because it made his image recognizable, which made people feel like they knew him,
right.
and therefore trusted him.
Now we started talking about Joel Meyerowitz, the great
Yes.
Joel Meyerowitz, and you've included one of his images here. Tell us about this.
This is a photograph from his time in Provincetown. I believe it's from 77, and it's called Mian. And this was the first portrait that he took that sort of started his portrait series, which became, the Redheads and those incredible sort of full-length portraits that, he's sort of like prefigured like Renica Dijkstra in a way, just like these incredible, people posed at the beach just in front of the sand with this great, like, the horizon line. He also was using a 4x5 camera, and he was started by photographing, the light of Cape Cod, and then he was sort of wanted to create a new experiment for himself where he was trying to use a viewfinder to document people. And like, how do you do that? How do you get somebody to stay still, in the way that is necessary to have all the detail of an image of that size? He's so personable. And like he definitely has like an incredible charisma that I think could probably compel people just to like engage with him in the way that you have this incredible vulnerability. But this image, to me, it's like he's really captured someone on the precipice of like adolescence, and there's like incredible sort of sense of just like being on the cusp.
He is. I don't rave a lot about photographers on this show very much, but he's really one. I mean, his just to there are, I can't even think of a photographer who has done so many different bodies of work at such a high level. I mean, from the street stuff, which brilliant, amazing, to Cape Light, which I mean, the Cape Light book is maybe one of the top 10 books ever made. And then these
Yep.
portraits and the 9/11 series, it's just, I mean, I mean, he's been around with us for a long period of time to be able to do that, but it's just,
He's
it is an amazing body of work.
87.
Oh my.
Yeah, he's still just the energy and the way that he sort of is still he's still trying new things. He's
Yeah.
still posing these questions and embarking on new series.
It would be fascinating to me. I mean, because since he has such a broad range, I'd love to know what his 5 images would be. You know, what those things that influenced him. What a great discussion. I'd
Well,
pay
I
to
can
have
tell
that.
you that the person who made him want to become a photographer was Robert Frank,
Yes, I know
and
that.
he was working with him on a commercial set for a girl's uh, clothing catalog, which is partially why I was thinking of and included one of the next images,
Which is
which is Guy
this
Bourdin.
Guy Bourdin. Oh, okay. So draw the line for me here. That's interesting. Go ahead.
So this is from a catalog that Guy Bourdin made for Bloomingdale's called Sighs and Whispers. And I worked as a shop girl for Dover Street Market for like 7 years while I was in university, just on Saturdays. And I was often put in the basement where Idea Books had a little project space. I spent a lot of time looking at photo books and that as a medium in itself. And in addition to photo books, looking at catalogs and the commercial aspect of it, I think it's what sustained so many people. It's the way that so many of them came into the business and the art. And I feel like Guy Bourdin's one of the sort of artists who there is no line between the commerce and the art, the style and the selling of desire. To me, it's in a conceptual way as much as it's in sort of a capitalist sort of way of really just like working as an image. I mean, there's nothing more glamorous, and I think, fashion photography is a whole, art in itself. And to me, he's the pinnacle.
Well, Ariella Wolens, it's been great to hear from your whole spectrum of experience from the time you were a shop girl to now your work as a curator at the NSU Museum of Art. What a pleasure to learn more from you. Thanks for being on the Crit House.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for watching the Crit House.